Welcome in to another episode of the My Two Bits Gators Football Podcast. I am Ben, joined as always by my partner in crime, Mr. Randy. Randy, how are we feeling this evening?
Hey, brother, feeling good, feeling good. The only thing is it's a wet night in Gainesville, so try to stay dry. That's about it.
As always, helping us out with that meteorology forecast from the Gville area. I love it. Um, it's kind of a wet night in Mississippi as well, which is where I'm joining you from this evening. So getting that panhandle vibe over here from just a little west of the Florida panhandle. So anyway, um, moving on and into our discussion this evening of the UF NIL situation, state and NIL overall, which is going to
Oh
be a
boy.
very, yes, oh boy, indeed, oh boy, a very interesting discussion topic for this evening. I think a lot of different things that we're going to be able to delve into in the ever-changing landscape. Heck, there were big changes in this today that we're actually going to touch on just briefly. And I feel like there are big changes in this pretty much every day as we go through and kind of talk about this stuff. So a lot of cool stuff we're going to get into, have some really neat information that we kind of alluded to that we were really excited to share with everybody tonight. So without further ado, we'll get right into it. As always, we'll start off with our intro here, go through our mission, our vision, and our agenda for the pod tonight. Our mission, as always, is to provide factual analysis of all things Florida Gator football, to have unfiltered conversation around the product on the field, as well as recruiting and overall coaching decisions. Our analysis will be based on review of film, and while we will express opinion, that opinion should always be based in some form of fact. We will also evaluate strategy and tactics and observation of player personnel decisions and on-field execution. So that piece of the vision will not have a ton to do with what we discussed tonight, obviously, in regards to the specific piece in relation to NIL. However, we will always base our analysis in factual based evidence wherever we possibly can. And I think there's plenty of that to go around tonight in this evening's discussion. So to that end, our agenda will consist tonight of a discussion of the current state of NIL overall. They will then talk about why UF has struggled in this area and who is to blame for that. A lot of conversation around that floating around. And I think it's really important to kind of talk about where we should kind of put some of that blame. And really, maybe blame's not even the right word, but where where some of the issues lie around that is really, I think, what's important to kind of get some clarity around. We will then have a discussion on the current state of UF's NIL collective and where we kind of go from here. And lastly, we're going to close with kind of a look at the on-3 evaluation of 2023 rosters. The reason we're looking at 23 is 24 is not out yet because the rosters haven't finalized because the spring portal hasn't closed yet. It hasn't even opened yet. The 2024 rosters are not finalized until that spring portal window has closed and they're, official, which doesn't happen until obviously kind of fall camp really opens up. So you don't have those evaluations yet, but the 2023 roster valuations, obviously we can take a look at. And while I don't think that's necessarily a like totally finalized number, that's on-3's evaluation doesn't take into account certain things, which we will talk about. It's kind of the best case scenario that we can look at. So we will take a look at it for comparison purposes and kind of look through everything. And then from there, we'll do our sign off. So with that, let's kind of get things opened up here and talk about NIL as an overall. So right off the bat, we have big news today that came out regarding Dartmouth and their players unionizing. So why is this big news? Well, it's big news because this is the first time that any university players have actually voted collectively to join a union. And the reason that's a big deal is it opens the door for collective bargaining. So having said that, why does that matter? Well, it matters because it opens the door for potentially getting some more things on the table, some more opportunities if more students and more universities were to join in this. So real quick, just right off the bat, nothing super detailed, but I want to get your thoughts on that, Randy. So give me your take on this yet again, new and updated information that has come out yet again. Seems like there's something new every day with Dartmouth unionizing today.
I'm telling you, man, it's just weird, wild stuff. It's such a
Indeed.
fluid situation. And as I look at it in the sense of what I mean, there are a lot of people, as we know, that hate unions, right? Especially look at corporations, the way that they're structured. But at the end of the day, when you look at a union for what it is, you're looking at a institution, you're looking at a practice, you're looking at an organization, right? Formed by workers, formed by employees. Hmm. Right? Joined together, right? They're using their minds, they're using their ideas. They want to have what? They want to have rights. They want to have a voice. And so it's very interesting because I can think of another, you get Dartmouth, right? If it's going to be Dartmouth and basketball, well, that's pretty close to, oh, I don't know, the NBA. And we know what that means. So at the end of the day, it's unique because it happened at an Ivy League school, and for all intents and purposes, I think you had mentioned this. It's interesting because when those minds get together, obviously they're looking at the legalities of a lot of things,
Yep.
and they're looking at the certain rights of the employee, whatever the case might be, the worker. And so I think that's going to be a huge thing moving forward, especially if other schools jump on board. They will be because here's the other thing too, that you got to think about all this jargon, all the language that comes behind it, all the legalese. And so it's going to be really unique, and I suspect many schools are just going to jump on that bandwagon and say, hey, that sounds like a good idea, let's go, because our players need representation, and if we can pull together voices and strengths and ideas to have that ability to negotiate and form that position of strength over wages, benefits, whatever you want to call it, let's just call it what it is: money.
That's right.
Money, period. Name, image, likeness, fine. Pay to play, fine. Whatever you want to call it. Wild, Wild West, fine. Give them a bag here and there, fine. Friends of the program, fine. But how can we pull together to lift our collective voices and ideas so that we are properly represented in order to collect a little bit of compensation? That's it.
Yeah. No, I think you make some good points there. And I'm actually excited about this development. I think this probably gets us closer. It's not there yet, obviously, but I think this gets us closer to a direction where we can put some more definition around this. I think this actually takes us a step closer to getting away from the Wild Wild West, which I think is a good thing here. And the reason that I feel that that is the case is the closer we get to having some form of organization, right? It doesn't have to be called a union, whatever, but some sort of organization, some sort of collective when it comes to the players, right, that are involved in this. If they have a group that is abiding, right, to a set of guidelines or a collective ideal, right, that they're going after because they are unionized or they are put together in a group, right, then they're negotiating towards a set objective. Well, guess what? That's going to put parameters around what they're after, right? It's not going to be, hey, Mr. Player over here, you get this, and hey, Mr. Player over there, you get that. No, that's out the window if they do this, right? There's going to be a set group of guidelines of, okay, this is the group of players, this is what they're bargaining for, this is what they're going to get. So one, I think it puts a lot more things on the table for them, so it's beneficial for them overall, i.e. TV dollars. That's a whole nother conversation. However, also, I think it puts a lot more parameters around what is in play and what isn't in play. And that's another thing that I really like, because it gets some of this bag money, it gets some of this under the table, underhanded, backdoor shadiness out of this equation in the long run. Really, I really do. Right? I love Eminem, but we don't need some shady hanging out over here. We really don't.
No, I know, I get it. I think it was just kind of the way that you were fighting for the word for shady is like, no, I thought you were going there. And I'm like, okay, yeah.
Well, I'll work it in. But it's we got to get the dad jokes in, right? So but seriously, I mean, I think this is a step in the right direction, and I mean that wholeheartedly. To that end, another step potentially in the right direction is the Tennessee-Virginia lawsuit ruling that came down at the end of, or the beginning of last week. So yet again, more news, right? So we'll move on to that now. So there's a recent ruling that came out last week. For those that didn't see it, a judge ruled that the NCAA cannot restrict players' negotiations of NIL deals, period. They can't do it. They're not allowed. It is against the legislation that Congress passed that allow this in the first place, and that any restriction the NCAA places on it is null and void, period. End of discussion. That was the ruling, or the gist of it anyway. So basically, any violations, quote unquote, of NCAA policy in regards to NIL are null and void. That's basically what the judge's ruling said in not so many words. That's a very interesting ruling too, right? Because that also opens the door for more things to come into play. Now, in the short run, the potential ramifications of this are not good, in my opinion, because it opens the door to kind of everything coming into play, right? It opens the door to, oh, okay, well, we can do whatever we want then, right? What little restrictions and what little enforcement was in place, all that's now out the window, right? So that in the short run, I think, is actually bad, in fairness. However, again, the long-term implications here potentially are good, because it opens the door for more things that had been removed from the table, i.e. university athletic dollars, TV monies, right? These things that had been removed by the NCAA, that they said, no, 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 we're not going to let NIL touch that money. Well, why not? I don't know. They said no. Whatever, that was their take. I don't know why, but it was, right? We'll get into more conversation about that later as to what was and wasn't in play for those who maybe are not aware. For the record, Brandy and I weren't aware before we did some of this research. However, that stuff was not in play. That was not allowed to be touched. Well, guess what? This ruling says you can't say what can and can't be touched, NCAA. It's not up to you, right? It's not your judgment call. So very interesting ruling here, that I think, again, long run, probably a good thing. Short run, however, yikes. Because it may have opened Pandora's box all the way up. You know, we had it about 7/8 open, and now it is fully open. So that is the downside here, I think, for sure, for at least for the time being. But I think that's only going to be a short-term effect. I don't think that's going to be a long-standing thing. I think we'll figure out a resolution here, and I think it's actually interesting that the current NCAA commissioner, Mr. Charlie Baker, has actually proposed some things that make a little more sense in terms of opening some of those doors. So interested to see where some of that goes. So while, again, this judge ruled that they don't have the power to regulate any of that, the fact that he is trying to maybe deregulate some of it is potentially a good thing, I think. In theory, it's kind of hard to know right now. A lot of this stuff is still so fluid and so in process, it's really hard to get a read on some of the overall landscape. I think it's still going to be one of those things that's going to have to take a few more years to kind of work its way out. But I think some of the stuff that's happening now, and I think will continue to happen with some of the lawsuits that are still pending, we won't get into all that right now, but there are still some out there that are potentially have some big ramifications depending on which way they go. Are potentially going to open the door to the right things, or I don't know about the right things, that's probably the wrong word, to some more controllable, visible, and productive things happening in this piece of the world, which frankly needs to happen, because right now it is I'm tempted to swear, but I won't. It is a absolute cluster, and we need to do something about it. And right now that's not happening. So something needs to change, and it does need to change sooner than later. But I do think that there are signs pointing to that change being on the horizon, and I'm glad to say that. So what are your thoughts on this lawsuit?
Yeah, in the famous words of my good friend Ryan Seacrest, buckle up, dim the lights, and here we go.
There you go.
You know, it's hard because Pandora's box was opened a few years ago. We didn't know what was going to come of it. We knew there was going to be some stuff happening. Now it's like, okay, great. Players get paid because of name, image, and likeness, whatever that means. Unless you have a cool name like Kool-Aid McKinstry. You know, names like that makes a lot of sense. Okay, I get it. Exactly. And then you have the shenaniganery that takes place with a school down south of us, right? And John Rui is doing big things down there. So again, is it pay for play? Is it NIL? What is it? Who knows? The other thing is tampering.
Oh
When
yeah.
you look at the rules involved in tampering, technically,
What
technically
what
section
what rules?
232, yeah, section 232-4B of the whatever. You're not supposed to approach a player if you're school A, you're not supposed to approach a player at school B until that player is officially entered into the portal. The coach, the AD, the school has signed off on that player entering the portal, and that player has officially entered the portal. We know darn well that there was poaching. We know darn well with certain players that they were talked to well before they had any clue of entering the portal. That negotiation period, boy, talk about cutting tension with the dullest knife in the world. You could imagine what was going on behind closed doors. So as far as that goes, how do you enforce that? And that's why I believe fundamentally the judge did what he did. How do you enforce that stuff? Oh, that's right. You can't. So it had to be overturned. So in the short term, hey, this is what people have been calling for all the time. Is it NIL? Is it pay for play? Are they just getting a bag? Do we just want to pay you X amount of money to come here, son? Come here and play, right? You wear these colors, but more importantly, we give you this amount of green. Okay. So no, we're going to put restrict. No, it is this. It is it is that. No, you can't encroach. No, you can't push. No, you can't do this. And now, short term, victory. But long
Short term, the
term,
answer is now yes.
yes. But
To all
long
of the
term,
above.
now Pandora's box. Now you know what? It's like the magician who has the box. He's taking something out of the box, but wait, there's more. The next thing you know, he takes out a 17-foot canoe, and you're going, what else is down there? Very fluid. We'll see what happens. But long term, when more dollars come into play, and now with Dartmouth unionizing and that model seeming to gain
Yep.
momentum, well, I'm sure it's going to gain momentum.
Yep.
It's in more ways than we can imagine. So therefore, long term, it's going to be another head scratcher when it comes to great. What's next? Now what's possible? Because with that comes more bargaining power. With that comes more marketing dollars. And with that, this deal, right? There's a reason why the SEC left CBS, people, right? Big reason, to the tune of 3+ billion. I can't even count that high. Dollars.
Money.
Exactly. So now with those dollars in play, plus future dollars to come, and with more schools shifting, realigning to follow TV money, this price, I think this is going to be extremely costly in the long run.
Yeah, that's the holy grail here, for the players anyway, right? Is getting access to those funds that they do not currently have access to. For those that don't know, and again, we'll touch on this more later, so I won't belabor it now. But that's kind of the missing link in this equation right now, and where I think we're ultimately going to end up working towards is what I'm seeing. That's where the arrows are pointing right now from all of this, right? From the unionizing, from the effects of this lawsuit. This is the direction that this seems to be heading, certainly by all indications, right? And we're setting precedent, right? This is what we're doing at this point. This lawsuit, the unionization, we're setting precedent, and that is the key, especially in legal sense, right? You set those precedents. Now all of a sudden you've got that to fall back on, and watch out, because that is the holy grail when it comes to the courtroom, right? Is we have the precedent to fall back on, and that's where the rubber meets the road, right? Especially in the courtroom. So we'll see what happens. The other interesting thing here, that we wanted to talk about before we leave this section, is just some of the leaks that have started to come out, right, over the past really year and a half, even. I don't know exact timing on that, in fairness, but certainly in the past year, there have been quite a few, about what the different players, or what various different players, really, and it's not always coming from the player. It can sometimes come from teammates. There's been various different sources on this, but what they have been paid or even offered, right, in certain cases, in these various NIL, I don't even want to call it deals, NIL propositions, right? Probably the most famous one potentially is the Rashada deal, right? That's probably UF might have the most famous one of all, potentially in regards to this, ironically. But there have been quite a few that have come out over the past year and a half that have been very, very interesting for the ones that have made it to the public eye. Now, in fairness, the Rashada one is a little different because that was handled through the collective. Maybe mishandled through the collective is a better way to say that. However, there have been some very interesting ones. So I'll let you kind of lead this off and give me your thoughts on just some of the stuff that you've seen, heard, whether it's specific examples or general or whatever. Mine are kind of more general. I mean, I do have one or two that I wanted to call out, but it's more just about this concept of what we're hearing and kind of how we're hearing about it coming about, I guess I would say. Give me your thoughts though on this whole situation and kind of what we're hearing and the nature of it in general.
Some of the figures, Rashado's what, 13.2 million, 13.4 million, whatever it is. I think it's interesting. That's how it started off. And you shift from one school to another school to another school. Then your national letter of intent goes away. And then you end up going for a fourth school, and to make a fraction of what you were calling for. Blows my mind. Yeah. Anyways, say that to say some of the amounts that have come out just been unreal. And some of the amounts that these players have asked for, that have bargained for, is unreal. Especially when I look at especially certain players on maybe a different sport, not necessarily football, a valued player on a roster that goes to a coach and say, hey, well, it's my senior season coming up. I have the option to do this, 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 and this. Okay, great. Well, if I want to stay here, I deserve X. What? And so that just baffles the crap out of me, Some of the amounts have been interesting, but not only that, some of the requests. And that's what I think is so tough, is to hear some of the requests to say, hey, I think I'm worth this. I think I deserve this. I should deserve this. I'm entitled to this. My body, I've been put through this. I've done this. And that's just really, really tough to negotiate, especially when you look at the overall state of where that player is at, because that player, don't want to speak ill, but could have a very significant injury. They might not be able to make it far in the league, whatever the case might be. A lot of factors that go into it. But again, for me, I'm just going to sum it up as head scratcher.
Yeah, fair enough. So the Rashada one again, it's worth bringing up because I do think it's pretty significant, obviously. But there's been a lot, right? There's been a lot talked about. There's been a lot of things that are floating around out there besides, again, Rashada was still negotiated with the collective. And I think that's important to bring about, right? Maybe it was misnegotiated with the collective, in fairness, but, there were rumors with Lagway, more than rumors. There was claims, I guess I'll say, with Lagway right before signing day that USC was putting together a package in quotes, because some of this was definitely not like on the books NIL deals, of like a $6 million deal for him to come there. And I'm not talking about necessarily like a 4-year, $6 million deal, for the record. Let's be clear. We're talking about this year. So this was the rumor. Now, again, this is not substantiated. This is not on paper, right? That's the problem with some of this stuff, is a lot of it is this bag money stuff, right? That somebody's, potentially offering him, however much money in a bag of cash, plus whatever deals are on top of this, right? So again, it's a rumor. I can't substantiate it. I probably shouldn't even say it based on the premise of this pod and everything else, right? That it should be based in some sort of fact, and I can't validate that that's a fact. So in fairness, But that's hard with this section, right? That's what makes this difficult, because these things, you can't really validate them, right? There was a Georgia player that stated that, or I'm sorry, it was Ohio State player that stated that Georgia offered one of their offensive line commits $1 million to come play there for just to go there. Not like, again, not a 4-year deal we're talking about. Just, hey, come play here. Here's $1 million cash. It was the implication. Again, that wasn't finalized. It's not on paper, right? It's not written, but the player was saying this, right? And it wasn't him. It was one of his teammates. But this is the kind of stuff that you're hearing, right? This is the kind of stuff that's coming out. So I guess what I would say about the factual piece of it is, these are the reports from players, right, that are being stated, that are being publicized, right? So that's where my factual piece would come into this, right? So the point that we're trying to make in all of this, and that we're trying to talk about, is that this is where the Wild Wild West piece comes in, right? Is who the heck knows what is or isn't actually happening, because we can't be fully privy to that. Obviously, we're not on the other end of that phone call. But the stuff that's coming out, the stuff that is surfacing, that is making its way to the actual publication in the media, which, you know, is probably a fraction of a percentage of what's actually going on, right? But the stuff we actually are hearing about, that is actually being documented, is not reassuring. Right? It's not good. So at the end of the day, the message here, in my opinion, is that we need, one, a heck of a lot more transparency than what we're getting right now. Because one of the worst things about this is, in my opinion, without question, is that when you see something that has a lack of oversight, which NIL certainly does right now, right? We talked about it. The rules, one, they were just ruled unenforceable to begin with. But even if they were, quote unquote, enforceable before that, they really weren't being enforced with any kind of tenacity, certainly by the NCAA. They were kind of picking and choosing where they were looking and everything else, right? And I would argue that even if they were trying to be enforced, would that enforcement hold up? Well, we just saw, no, it won't, right? That lawsuit just proved that. So there's no teeth to the enforcement. And then on top of that, we have no transparency. We have no visibility to what the heck is going on. That is not a recipe for success, period. I don't care who you talk to. That's not an opinion. That's reality, right? There's no way that with a lack of accountability and a lack of transparency, you are going to get reputable dealings. That just doesn't happen, right? You're going to get some very, very, very questionable at best stuff going on. And at worst, I thought about it. At best, it's questionable, and at worst, I don't even know, right? It's ugly. It's ugly stuff that can be going on here, right? To your point from earlier, tampering, right? Poaching.
Yep.
Right? Just who's got the most money and how can they sling it, right? So this goes to some of the points that we're about to get into. So I think this makes for a nice transition to our next point. Why has UF struggled here, and who is to blame? So let's have a conversation about NIL and how this works, and then we're going to get into some really interesting information about why UF has struggled. And this is absolutely factually based, and we'll have some more conversation around that in a minute. But we'll really get into the teeth of why UF has had a problem here, or had difficulty here, maybe is a better way to say it. But let's first talk about how this works, where these funds come from, where they're eligible to come from, at least as of today. That could change literally tomorrow, but as of today, where these funds are eligible to come from, and how universities can build and collect these funds for the collective. And I'll let you lead that off if you have that ready to go. Do you have that info handy?
Yeah, so the main thing regarding the monies here, and this is interesting, because a lot of people are thinking, hey, University of Florida, public institution, there's like $1.5 billion going on in construction, right? In projects and this
Yep.
and that and the other.
Yep.
There's a lot of money there, and there's
Yep.
over 500,000 people, active alumni, roaming around the globe. Hey, how about them? Right? So that's the other misconception, because I've heard a lot of people just in conversations I've had privately, just, hey, look at all this money coming flowing in from Tallahassee. Look at all this money flowing in from the state. Look at all this money coming from here and here and here. And what's interesting is when you look at the funds cannot come from the University of Florida.
Yep.
The funds also cannot be commingled with state funds coming from the state of Florida. So have to be kept aside, because the UAA, the University Athletic Association, is separate from the University of Florida. I know, confusing. But the boosters and businesses are source of these funds. Period.
But in addition, let's call out, because you just said the UAA is separate from the University of Florida. Very true. But the
Yes.
UAA can also not be a source of these funds.
And that's the other thing that people scratching their heads, right? You have Mike Norvell, right, who FSU got penalized for this, whatever. But I want to say, I don't know the amount, but I know Mike Norvell gave to their collective.
So yeah, which he's not supposed to be allowed to do. Now, again, that was previous to this judge's ruling, but he was not supposed to be allowed to do that. That is direct violation of previous NCAA policy, I guess I'll say, because now who knows what the heck the policy is, but previous to last Monday.
Exactly. So you've got that, and then there are rumors. Again, rumors. Don't hold me to the fire on this, people. But the reason why a certain other collective that we'll get into is as big as it is because their head coach is the primary driver of that collective. So that's what's also tough to see, is because of the limitation. Again, no rulings have changed, but the limitation of the funds, they have to come from boosters. They have to come from businesses. They can come from alumni. It's just a different structure of how the funds are characterized.
Yep, absolutely. So really important call out there. So let's clarify that just a little further. So boosters donate, they donate to the UAA. So they say, hey, I want to support Florida athletics. I'm going to donate to the UAA. So I'm going to make a $1,000 donation to the University of Athletic Association Fund for the University of Florida. I have now supported Gator athletics by making my donation. And by doing so, I have not supported NIL with a single solitary dollar. Let's be clear when we say that. So if a booster earmarks a donation to Gator athletics, to the University Athletic Association, which is typically how it's always been done, right? That's where donations go. They have not contributed a single dollar to NIL by doing so. Wrap your head around that. So in other words, what now has to happen is individual boosters and corporate sponsors, to the point, right? Businesses as well are eligible to do this. They now have to donate additionally to the NIL collective, separately, whatever you want to call it, in order to fund Florida Victorious. That is what we are saying, and that is a fact as it currently stands today. Now, it has been proposed by Charlie Baker, as we mentioned earlier, that this could potentially change, that university funds could be earmarked for these players, that is potentially on the table. He actually drafted a letter back in December proposing this as a rule change for this year. It has to be approved. It has to go through the board, yada, yada, yada. But that could change, again, as soon as tomorrow. We have no idea. But I'm saying as soon as tomorrow. There's no proposition on the table to change that tomorrow, just so we're clear. But just with the ever-changing landscape of this, I'm putting that out there. That could literally change at any point in time. But as of today, this is how it sits. In addition to that, I will throw in there that advertising and promotional deals, such as Colin Castellan last year with the BMW of Gainesville deal that he signed, where he signed up to promote them in several commercials. I don't remember if there were like billboards involved or what all was involved, but he signed a marketing deal, if you will, to promote BMW of Gainesville BMW. I don't know the exact name of the business. I apologize. But
That's good. BMW Gainesville.
all right. In doing so, he received direct compensation from the dealership. He got a car, probably got some money for his representation and his advertising, right? His marketing of the dealership that he agreed to do. That is not part of Florida Victorious. That is, he is eligible to do so as part of NIL, but that is not part of the collective. So here we go again with something else that is not included in these funds. So it is very segmented, is very complicated, is also very segmented as to what money actually gets into this pot to help fund the deals and or bag money, quite frankly, because let's not kid ourselves. This is a reality. Pay for play is real. If you don't think it is, trust me, it is. Ask Trevor, ask Princely. Promise they'll tell you it is.
Oh boy.
I don't care what they say publicly. Those things are not part of the money that goes to pay that. They're just not. They're not allowed to be, or at least they're not supposed to be, I guess I would say. And for the record, I definitely believe that at the University of Florida, that is staying separate. I definitely believe that segmentation is being observed and upheld. And I'm not saying that with orange and blue goggles. I'm saying that based on everything that we hear out of Napier, Strickland, the source that you have talked to personally, who is also an athletic coach at the University of Florida, other sources that we have that are close to the program that we are about to discuss, information that we have cited from that shall not be named officially. However, the integrity with which the rules that have been dictated, whether they could be, should be, or can be going forward based on this recent ruling, woulda, coulda, shoulda been in place or not, is what I'm trying to say. Regardless of that, the University of Florida has been following said rules, right? Whether they should have been there or not, they have been followed by UF, because that is the integrity with which this program has been operating. We've talked a lot about the integrity with which UF has tried to operate with. And we actually thought that was more of a handcuff to us than anything else. Turns out maybe that wasn't as much of a handcuff as we thought. We'll get to that in just a moment here. So any other thing you want to say about the structure of NIL funds and where they come from before we get into kind of the meat of this here?
No, I think it was really important to make those call outs, because you look at what it was meant for before, the Gator boosters and Bull Gators, and the long-standing history and tradition of those people, those organizations contributing dollars to the UAA, the University Athletic Association. You have the original, the Gator Collective, which had to be scrapped because of the Rashada deal. No disrespect to the director there at the time, Walker Castro. He was dismissed because of the handling of everything, right? He just and he's a great person, but just was not properly equipped to handle that situation on that stage with that particular setup. And again, it was the first rodeo. It really was. And so when you look at the Gator Collective switching to Florida Victorious, let's be frank, right? The University of Florida, non-for-profit institution, it's an educational institution, great. Florida Victorious is very much a third-party for-profit entity. And as far as obtaining those dollars now, to funnel those dollars, it's going to be very interesting to see how they're going about getting the dollars into that collective. I know we'll talk about that here in a second.
Yep. So to kind of get back to the point here now of why we've struggled here and who is to blame, which is the topic of this whole conversation, we're going to cite some inside information, quite frankly. So I will let you kind of lead this This came from a source that you were able to get in contact with, which is can't stress how valuable this information was. We literally would not have been able to do this pod without this information. This is a source very close to the program. They have asked to remain nameless.
Yeah.
However, the information was permitted to be shared. So we are allowed to share the information, just not the source. So we'll leave it at that. However, it is absolutely a viable and trustworthy source, and we can leave it at that. So without further ado, please give us some information on why Florida has struggled here, what those causes are, and a little context around that. Take it away.
Yeah. So people wonder regarding the position of a collective, the state of the collective, the size of the collective, the depth of a collective. For those of you who don't know, Florida actually had the first collective that was the Gator Collective. It was the first of its kind. But then when you look at what happened, as we forementioned, with the Rashada deal, that falling apart and having to scrap and run back with, like a puppy with a tail behind its legs or between its legs, a lot had to change. And so a director of NIL had to be appointed. There had to be a board. There had to be this and that. The feedback that I have received when looking at the state of NIL as it is for the University of Florida, look at the donor base. And for those of you who don't know, the Florida Victorious donor base is somewhere around 24, 23, 2,500 members, in that range. Okay. We are having, University of Florida is having resistance from a lot of people, a lot of donors, a lot of businesses to pay players. So here's the thing. Monies come in. The collective, Florida Victorious, cannot tell that donor where to put that money. It's almost like having a PAC, a political action committee. You can receive the funds, but you cannot direct the person giving the funds on how to position those funds. The donor has to specify where those funds go. But here's the thing. A lot of donors, when you look at the history of University of Florida, it's nice to have your name on a building. It's nice to have your name on a research building or whatever the case might be for all these structures that live on campus. Outside of that, there's a huge resistance to pay players, mainly because of they don't know if that player is going to stick around. They don't know if it's worth it for the player, as it makes sense for injury and overall long-term tenure at the University of Florida. Because the other thing that is not in place is the C word, contract. That's not in place. So it's not like, hey, we're going to pay Ben. We're going to pay Ben. Going to be here for at least 2 years. So based off of that, it's going to be $1.5 million a year. Here you go, sign this contract. Nope, that doesn't exist right now.
Where do I sign?
Yeah, right. I do believe you have some years of eligibility left, my friend.
I do.
Graduate transfer and a half. No, but I was so shocked to hear that in the sense of the size of the donor base, but more so the resistance to pay players.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that was very interesting information to get. The resistance to it was very interesting, but also the number of collective members. Now, in fairness, I will say this was what, 2 months ago, month and a half ago that we got this intel. So it is possible that the number has gone up a little, especially with some of the changes that have gone on, some of the advertising that's gone on. We'll talk about that a little later. Since the what's the position title called? Director of NIL operations, is that correct?
I believe so.
Yeah. So we'll have a discussion around that later. So it's possible that number has gone up as far as membership. But at the time, roughly 2,500 was the correct number. For context, Ole Miss, the Growth Collective, has over 6,000 members. So just to give you, and for the record, they're not considered the wealthiest collective. They are one of the most populous in number, but they're not considered the wealthiest. And another thing to keep in mind is the dollars that are in Florida Victorious are not made public on purpose. Most collective dollars are not made public on purpose. They don't want that information out there so that players and or people know what is in the kitty, if you will, right? So they can't use that as a bargaining chip.
Yep.
Right, which is fair enough. I don't blame any program for not making that information public, but you can kind of assess what might be out there for knowing that one program has 2,500 and another has 6,000. Right, that can probably give you a clue as to what might be floating around out there. So, just food for thought. And when it comes to this, so yeah, we were both pretty blown away when we learned some of those numbers as far as membership goes. That was very eye-opening and probably more insightful than I would have ever thought it could possibly be. I would have never guessed that with our alumni, to your point, right, 500,000 living alumni, fan base that's through the moon, right? When you look at there are a few different sites out there that kind of project this stuff. When you look at the most supported teams nationally, we still rank in the top 5. Believe that or not, in most sites that estimate that kind of stuff. I don't know where Ole Miss is, but it's not top 5. It's not top 10. I don't know that it's top 20 for the record. Yeah. I don't know. They don't rank it outside the top 10, but it's sure as heck not top 10. And yet their NIL collective numbers dwarf ours.
They do. I think another thing I wanted to throw in here that I recently found was, and B, I didn't get a chance to share it with you, but one thing that in my conversations with the source made a quote, and I said, "Huh, I might have heard that before. That rings a bell. I know I did, because it's on the homepage for Florida Athletics in the UAA. It rings a bell because it's posted in the swamp when you go in through specific gates." Okay. And that is the UAA's motto: championship experience with integrity. And then the UAA strategic purpose: provide a championship experience with integrity on and off the field for student athletes and the Gator Nation. So, to your point, B, you can't have a purpose like that. You can't have a statement like that and try and have two-sided talk behind the curtains, right?
That's right.
So
that's right. And I agree with that wholeheartedly, right? And I don't think we are, from a standpoint of the UAA, from a standpoint of the university. And I'm not saying NIL does either, for the record. I don't know what NIL does. I don't know what the collective does. Again, it's separate from the university, as for now anyway, as of this minute. But it's again, what it goes back to is what money is available in the program, in the collective, to the program from the collective. That's the key, right? And I think what we're trying to shine a light on here is there's less money in Florida's collective than there is in other collectives, and there probably needs to be for Florida to be competitive in this space currently. That's the message. If that hasn't been effectively delivered yet, as it stands today, we are behind when it comes to the money that we need to have to play in the NIL space as of today, as of how it works right now, and as of how much money is needed to compete at the top tier. We're behind, big time. Now, we'll go back to the question real quick of who is to blame. A lot of people have been blaming Napier for this. Does anything we are talking about right now sound like it should fall on Napier to you?
Goodness, no.
I cannot for the life of me see how this is Napier's responsibility. One, we just had a conversation about how Florida has made a conscious and direct effort to make sure that there is a separation of church and state here, if you will, right? So by all accounts, this should have absolutely nothing to do with any coaching staff, Napier or otherwise. And furthermore, what we have from, again, the information that you were able to gain is an issue with the donor base having a problem with this concept, which, for the record, I can't necessarily fault them. I understand the potential disconnect here, and we'll have a little conversation around what can potentially happen with that. But at the end of the day, I don't know how you put any blame on any member of the coaching staff, on Scott Strickland, on anybody involved with Gator athletics from the university level. Could we potentially put some blame on the previous director of NIL? Yeah. I could put some fault there, and they fired the guy. Okay. No disrespect to him. I'm not trying to be rude or condescending, but it sounds like to me that maybe he wasn't getting it done. He might have been over his head. And for the record, not because of the Rashada deal. That to me is a scapegoat. It seems to me that he just wasn't doing an effective job of marketing this properly to the right people in the right way. And hopefully the new person we have in, which again, we'll talk about in a minute, is going to do a better job. That remains to be seen. Jury's out on that one. But at the end of the day, we needed to make a change there, and I'm glad we did. So we'll see what happens. So to that end, let's move on. Let's have a discussion. Again, good transition on the current state of UF's NIL collective. So we already talked about the resistance to pay players from the current boosters. So let's talk a little about why that is and what some of the causes we think could be for that, but also what can we do about it? What changes can we make? So give me some of your thoughts around that. What do we think could potentially help with this going forward? What can we do to get that number up? And we'll leave the changes that have been made in personnel off the table from that for a minute. Let's just talk about conceptually, and then we'll get into some of the stuff that's happened as far as, the new director and all that stuff.
Yeah, so I think of anytime someone, you'll saying, right? Put your money where your mouth is. So you've got some of that going on. Obviously, how do you want to say? Of course, University of Florida is a unique school in the sense of it has multiple sports that excel. When you look at our men's baseball team, who's made it to Omaha multiple times, Kevin O'Sullivan at the helm, won Natty, great, over the course of 14 years or so, 13, 14, 15 years, whatever the number. Women's softball, Natty. Our track and field team, our men's golf team, women's soccer, lacrosse. I mean, across the board, it's just like
how many Capital One Cups do we have for those that aren't familiar?
Well-rounded.
Should we define the Capital One Cup real quick for those that don't know? I don't know.
Go ahead.
So Capital One Cup is something that came out like early 2000s, I think, and it was it gives credit for each national championship and or finishing close to a national championship in every major sport. I believe it is somewhat weighted to the more televised, more heavily watched sports, i.e. football, basketball, baseball, those things of that nature. However, you do get credit for each one of the national titles or places you finish right close to a national title, right? Final rankings, whatever it might be at the end of the year. Florida has 3 Capital One Cups. Nobody has more than 2 aside from us. So we are number 1 in finishing in that stat since that was invented back in, I don't remember the first year, 04, 05, something in that neighborhood, I want to say. It may even be later than that. Don't quote me on the year on that. It's something in that range. But yeah, we are number 1 since the invention of that particular achievement, if you will. Nobody has more than we do. So well-rounded is a very well way to say it. So moving on.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, when I saw it, I was like, how much is there? It is 3, so that's it. That's pretty stout. But the other thing is understanding the biggest. So although we have all these sports, championship caliber sports, men's and women's side across the board. Okay. Most people might know this, might not know this. I don't know. Every single sport loses money, with the exception of football. Gator baseball is really close for obviously they just built a brand new beautiful stadium a few years back, a beautiful 64 million dollar facility. But outside of that, every single sports program loses money. And like I said, baseball's very on the cusp of breaking even. But football is the only one that is quote unquote profitable, right? They're in the black.
I thought basketball made money. Am I wrong?
Based off my few sources, basketball is still not maybe it did in a certain
Maybe
era.
so. Are you talking purely at Florida, or are you talking overall?
At Florida?
Okay, so that's fully possible at Florida. I would so I think nationally the only two that make money are football and basketball, but it could be at Florida that it's only football. That's fully possible.
Yep. So, but that's the thing, right? So when you look at that, you look at all these other considerations when it looks at how dollars are broken up. How, at the end of the day, to get dollars in, people have to buy into a vision. People have to buy into a mission. People have to buy into a purpose, right? And as many fans that fill the swamp on a Saturday in the fall, how many of those can you really get to buy in to what Billy Napier is trying to build, what the UAA is trying to build, what Florida Victorious is trying to build? That's the hardest thing right now, because especially when you look at the past couple of years, the Gator faithful is frustrated, upset, angry, confused, puzzled. I get it. Completely understandable. But that's where this new director of revenue, as they call him, is going to come and hopefully bridge the gap on some of those things. So B, going back to your original question, as far as what's the answer, what can we do, what can help this issue, the only thing I can think of is having someone at the helm who is very good at fundraising. Because let's face it, all this is fundraising. It's high level, high intensity, big dollar fundraising. We're not talking about your kids have a box of candy that they're trying to sell for a fundraiser for a school trip going to Busch Gardens, right? This is not, we're selling,
sell them chocolate bars, baby.
Yeah, we're not trying to sell a $40 box of candy. We are trying to sell $20+ million to the orange and blue, with the hopes that we have the resources to quote our good friend Nick Nolte, they got the best players money can buy. Right.
And it ain't just 1 year. We need to sell 20 million every year. That's the key.
Got to keep it. That's the thing. You've created it. You created the machine. Do we have the cogs in place? Do you have the oil? Can it continue to function? Sustainability is huge in this arena, especially going back to the ruling from the NCAA, the ruling from the judge, and just everything else that's coming down the pipeline that's going to be modified here by Mr. Baker.
I like it. So that's a really good micro take from looking at it from Florida's perspective. I'm going to take a macro take on this.
Take that macro.
From looking at this from a macro take and bringing up the ruling and bringing up the unionization that we talked about earlier, I think what will help here is how NIL is potentially going to change. So I will take the approach here in looking at this question of what will help this situation. What can we do? What can Florida do? It's really not what Florida can do. It's what NIL can potentially evolve into here. I think what will help this situation significantly for Florida is potentially what Charlie Baker has proposed in opening up the UAA coffers, the university coffers, right, more specifically at these programs, because that will, as it's self-stated in this letter, basically benefit the quote rich schools. Florida qualifies as that, folks, when you look at the overall dollars that they have, right? That absolutely would be a benefit to this from Florida's standpoint, because they have the monies in the other areas, as we've already talked about, right? Those monies exist there, right? The revenue dollars that are in play in those places are absolutely solid, wealthy in play to help with this situation. It's not the same state that the collective is in. It's not the same state that Florida Victorious is in. So that's number one. Number two, with this most recent ruling and the potential for other things to come into play. Right now, I'm not saying Florida's going to do that right off the take. I don't think they will. Right. I think they'll still follow whatever the guidance is, regardless of what this judge ruled and whether or not the NCAA can enforce this. I think Florida will still follow the guidance because I think that's the rules that we play by. I also think that the way that it's set up, that is what we're fundamentally set in our current state to do. However, I do see the potential for that to start to change. But overall, I think what's most important is if we start getting into not only the university money, but I mentioned it earlier, the TV revenue dollars.
Oh boy.
Ladies and gentlemen, the number 1 and 2, and I don't know the order for the record, so I won't try to quote it, but I do know that the number 1 and 2 TV contracts, TV dollar contracts that exist in the United States for college football belong to the Big Ten and the SEC in no particular order because I don't know which one is greater off the top of my head. I think it's the SEC, but the Big Ten's is pretty big, so I really don't know, and I don't want to guess and be wrong. I know they're number 1 and 2 though. And it, as Randy mentioned earlier, is in the billions. So when you are playing in the billions for the TV revenue dollars that are fed to these conferences and subsequently to these schools, when you start playing with those kind of monies, all of a sudden the playing field is more than leveled. It is all of a sudden in your advantage. Now, granted, the other SEC schools are at the same advantage. That's fine. But all of a sudden, places like Miami, sorry, little cough, are in a lot of trouble because they are not in that same advantage. And the playing field just went into a huge discrepancy. And John Ruiz may have a whole lot of money, but that's a whole lot of money on the other side that he's going to have to make up for. So guess what? How many schools in Florida are in the SEC? Oh, just one. And all of a sudden, we just got a huge advantage. So that's my approach to this question and what we can do about it. It's less about what UF can do about it and more about what NIL may start to change into and how that may work in our advantage. And I really do see that in the not so distant future. Is it here today? Is it here tomorrow? Probably not. I won't guarantee anything because we've touched on this more than once, but I don't think so. But is this here by the time we're having this conversation next year? Oh, quite possibly. Quite possibly. I would definitely not put it off the table with the way things are rapidly evolving in this space. So for the record, I don't think it's quite that quick, but it is absolutely possible. And I think within definitely a couple of years, we are probably starting to talk about TV deals being a part of this money that is being allocated to these players. And that is huge for us. Well, huge if that happens. I can't stress how big that is. Sorry, what were you saying?
No, you're fine. I'm just going to say it's not just a couple of years, because when you look at the Big Ten TV deal, $8 billion running through the 2029-2030 season.
There you go. There you go.
To the SEC's $3 and change billion.
Running through what year, though?
That's what I could not find.
Okay, fair enough. So I bet that gets renegotiated and gets to something similar with that. So the other thing is, too, just to call this out very briefly, if you saw the new playoff model that's been suggested for 2026, what are the two teams with 3 automatic at-large bids, or 2 conferences, excuse me, with 3 automatic bids in that playoff? The 2 conferences, Big Ten, SEC. So it's already catering to those teams that have those bigger TV deals. There's a reason that happens. It's going to follow the money. It's going to follow the conferences that are growing, that are expanding, that are getting bigger. You're working towards the super conferences that are growing and expanding and getting bigger as a part of the TV deals, the contracts, the expansion, everything else. The NIL is going to follow that. The fact that we are already in one of those conferences is huge. It's huge. I'm telling you, this is temporary from an NIL perspective. Now, does it mean that we are going to all of a sudden be the juggernauts of everything in the universe? Of course not. There's other pieces that go into that. But from the NIL conversation, where we are at a shortfall now, just wait. I am convinced that time will turn the table here, and we are going to be in a better position sooner than later. So, having said that, going back to the micro and the take that you have, let's return to the, give me that title again, NIL Director of Revenue. Was that it?
Director of Revenue.
All right. And Mr. Wiebe, talk to me about what you know. Give me a little background here. Give me a little bio. He is our new NIL Director of Revenue. Give me the 411 on Mr. Wiebe and why we think he could or could not help this situation. And then we'll talk a little about what we've seen so far.
Yeah, so Freddie Wiebe, interesting guy. Has been in Gainesville a long time, 20 plus years, but his main start in Gainesville came at the helm of Gator Domino's Pizza, believe it or not. Owned one store, then one became two became three became four, and allegedly at one point he had with the busiest and highest producing Domino's franchise in the nation. Everyone that I've asked and talked about Mr. Wiebe, talk about the fact that he is a relentless marketer. He pushed and pushed and pushed for Domino's to be offered at Ben Hill Griffin, the Swamp. He pushed and pushed. He's so involved with the community when it comes to different fundraisers, different events, different festivals, always having the Domino's brand there, either at his cost or his store's cost. So as far as that goes, an extremely relentless marketer. He's developed unique relationships in that space because of his love for football. Allegedly was involved in some point with Spurrier's and knowing Steve Spurrier and helping him take that vision that he had for a restaurant and build it to what it is now, with Spurrier's and the rooftop bar visors as well. So as far as that goes, his knowledge in the space when it comes to effective marketing is going to be key. His connections and relationships that he's built over 20 plus years, that's definitely going to be key. But the other thing that I look at is from the other people that I've spoken to is his ability to be very persistent and very charismatic when it comes to the asking of the dollars, and just very direct in a no nonsense type of way. So that typically, when it comes to fundraising and asking for money, those characteristics typically will help and typically will yield good results.
All right. So he does sound like a smart guy. He figured out that selling pizza to college kids was a good idea.
Yep. Give it away.
I'm kidding.
Give it away. I was gonna say,
no.
pause there, like you held that in longer than I thought.
No, all joking aside. He does seem to have a good business sense for sure. He's definitely established more than just Domino's on a college campus, which I don't know that takes a ton of business sense. But in fairness, he has done a lot more than that. And I'm not trying to knock him at all. However, I would ask the question, is his experience relevant? Because growing businesses, restaurants, whatever the case may be, is that relevant to fundraising at this scale? For the record, I don't know the answer. I don't know. Yeah. I think that's one where jury's out. We'll see. Certainly, I think he has the negotiation tactics and understanding to potentially do it. But just because of the relevant experience, I don't know. Now, I don't know everything about the guy. It's not like I have some kind of full life bio sitting in front of me on him. I only know what we know from his business background. So we will see. Like you said, time will tell. I do want to get your thoughts on one thing that we have seen thus far in his short tenure, and that is these billboards. So we've had a little conversation around this. A lot of you may have seen them if you live anywhere in the state of Florida and have driven pretty much anywhere. any major metropolitan area anyway. These billboards are everywhere. Florida Victorious, right? Sign up, enroll now, right? Come be a part of the miracle, right? So these billboards are everywhere. And the question that I have is this an effective way to raise significant funds? And this will lead into our next topic well. And the key word there is significant, right? Is it going to raise money? Heck yeah, it'll raise money. No question. These billboards, especially in their prevalence, are going to raise some money. People are going to see this. A lot of Gator fans out there, 500,000 active living alumni. We've talked about it. Is this going to generate some dollars? Heck yeah, it's going to generate some dollars. Is it going to generate enough dollars for the spend for what we need it to generate, at least in the short term? This is my question. Now, in fairness, I don't think he's relying solely on billboards to generate the money that he needs. I would certainly hope not. If he is, we got a big problem, ladies and gentlemen. However, I don't think that he would be. Let's hope not, as I said. But is it really going to generate enough to even justify the spend? Is the juice worth the squeeze? This is always the question, right?
Whoa.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I would hope there's been some kind of market analysis done to say that, hey, this is going to generate us X amount of dollars and it costs us Y amount of dollars, right? And yes, but I don't know, because to me, the funds you're going to generate off this, right? How many big money donors are going to donate based on a billboard? I sure hope the answer is zero, for the record, because if that's all it took to get a big money donor, then we were doing something wrong before. Number one. Number two, my guess is that, for the most part, this is going to be your 25, your 50, your maybe $100 a month donations, right? That you're going to get in from these billboards. And we're going to get a fair number of them. But what are we really generating here annually? 5, 6, 700 grand if we're lucky, maybe top upside $1 million. And I'm being super generous when I estimate that number. And for the record, I have no idea, Gator Nation. I do not know. But at the end of the day, that seems like super best case scenario to me in my head. And again, this is a total guess. I have no idea. But it certainly doesn't seem like you could go much over $1 million in generating from this, plus whatever these things cost. And there's a lot of them. And they don't come cheap, right? You had a guesstimate on what these things cost. What was your guesstimate on the cost of these?
Yeah, well, and a lot of people that I've spoken to, billboards costing between $2,400 to $3,000 a month.
So that's the dedicated ones. In fairness, a bunch of the ones I saw in Orlando last week, they were the rotating ones where you share time with somebody else, right? And I think those do cost a little less, right? Because you're not sole, right? The electronic ones. So I think those do cost a little less. So, but even if it's a third of that price, right? And you've got God knows how many of these things, there got to be 40 of them statewide, maybe more. That's getting to be a pretty big bill every month, right? So to offset that, right, you got to get a lot of donations. So if it is $1 million a year, deduct 40 times 2,000 a month. What's that number? Right? It's 80 grand. So you're chopping off, call it 100 off that number. Now we're down to 900,000. Again, this is best case scenario in my head, right? So maybe you can net out $1 million, but I don't see it. But okay, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say you can net out $1 million from this. Great. You netted out $1 million. Super. Well, this is a good transition, I think, to talk about this next thing. Netting out $1 million. Sounds great, right? Hey, we netted out another $1 million for NIL. Fantastic, right? That's awesome. Except, is it? So this is our kind of final thing. We'll talk about this On3 NIL valuation of rosters. And again, I want to point out, this does not take into account any kind of, we'll call it bag money, right? This is just their evaluation of the players that are on the team, and what the value of that player is from an endorsement standpoint, as well as their overall roster value. So the first number on here, I will say, is inflated because Arch Manning is on here. So it's Texas. And that does jack this number up pretty substantially. However, I want you to kind of hear some of the differentiation in these numbers. So having said that, I'm just going to read off the top 5. And then I will read off. Actually, I'm tempted to read off the top 10, but I'll just leave it at the top 5. And then I'll read off where Florida is on here. Top 5 teams, Texas. And this is total team valuation. So this is every scholarship player on the roster. Texas, $19.9 million. Now, again, you cannot take this. I'm going to stress this again. You cannot take this as what the overall payout from Texas is. It is definitely higher than this number. Without question, it is larger than the number you are hearing me say. Like, zero doubt in my mind, it's bigger than this. How much bigger? I don't know, but bigger. Texas, 19.9 million. Alabama, 16 million. Ohio State, 13.6 million. USC, 13.5 million. Georgia, 13.4 million. Okay, there's your top 5. Florida ranks in at number 19 at 7.8 million. So for those doing math at home, that would be half of Georgia. Essentially, slightly more than half, but nonetheless half. So as I go back to my previous statement, what good does a million do? Basically nothing. For the record, it would move us up 4 spots on this list, just above Miami, ironically, which we all know is not real. And Miami is actually way higher on this list than the 8.2 million they're listed at. Way higher. Way higher. Let me stress that. Because again, this valuation does not take into account what? Bag money, which we all know. We all know Miami has got a lot of bag money, right? We all know
it's in a dumpster. It's in a dumpster. Absolutely.
Correct.
Dumpster money.
Dumpster out back of Life Wallet. That's where all that's hiding. So, for those that don't know, Life Wallet is John Ruiz's company. So we're just being funny. We're just playing. No offense, John. So
whoa, none. Yeah.
I doubt he's listening, but nonetheless. So at the end of the day, ironically, guess who's number 20 on this list? Ole Miss at 7.3. Just saying. Just funny, right? Also something we know. Again, so no taken into account of what's actually money's being thrown out from the collective. Like I said, this is just an evaluation of what players are worth in NIL deals and their roster valuation, quote unquote, in parentheses, of what NIL thinks they're worth based on their player talent and potential value and all this stuff. It's not a real number. It's the closest thing you're going to get to something real, but it's not real. There's no real number because, again, what did we talk about at the beginning of this thing? There's no transparency. So we have no idea what is real. We looked, believe me, we tried to find something that would actually give us that real number. Yeah, good luck. It doesn't exist because ain't nobody telling us that. So again, just like the collective numbers are not made public, neither are what players are really getting paid in public. It's all private. They're all private deals. They're sealed. Not, by the way, fun fact, not only are they sealed from us, they're sealed from the other players. Other players don't know what other players on their team are making. Those NI deals are private to the player. So there is zero transparency to any of this. Once again, folks, wild, wild west. We have got to get some more transparency around. And for the record, I'm not saying that they should be right now. I don't think it should be known that what Lagway is making to other players on his team. I'm not arguing for that. What I'm saying is that there should be some kind of collective bargaining, once again, around this whole thing that I think can potentially come out from some of these developments that are starting to happen. And that's where I think we need to go in regards to this. Do I think we should have like a full-on, players union like the NFL does? No, not necessarily to that extent, but it needs to start to resemble something closer to that. Because that's the only way we get to some kind of balance and an actual even playing field for the bulk of universities. Maybe not all, in fairness, but let's be real. Is Rutgers really competing on a year in and year out basis ever anyway? No, they're not. No offense, Rutgers. but you're not. So at the end of the day, and I'm just throwing out a school for the record, like at the end of the day,
Oh,
they're not competing in a year anyway, right? Is USF competing for titles? No. So at the end of the day, the schools that are competing for titles are the schools that are competing for titles. And frankly, a lot of that parity has fallen off over the past decade anyway, prior to NIL. So what are we doing? Like this potentially has the ability to bring some of that parity back, right? To bring some more teams back into the fold, if anything. Is it going to bring them all back in? No, it's not. But guess what? They haven't been back in 70 years. So, go back to when Minnesota won their last title. That's the last time they were in. Okay. So let's go back to the 40s, right? Or the 30s, whenever the heck it was that Minnesota won their last title. I think it was the 40s, but I can't remember off the top of my head. The point that I'm
sounds good.
trying to make is that we need to get back to where we have maybe 25, 30 teams that have a shot. Because right now it's like 10, maybe,
Right.
and maybe less, and we need to get back to that, to where we have at least some kind of shot for at least a decent number of schools. And right now, that's just not the case, at least from a talent standpoint. Is there a shot for a Washington to get in there? Yeah, clearly they proved that this year. Every once in a while, you get a weird, kind of one-off that can work its way in there. And I'm not saying that can't still happen, but that's the exception, not the rule, for sure. And it's the rare exception, quite frankly, right? So to me, that's what we need to work our way back to, is some more parity, some more balance, some more equity amongst the upper echelon, but not just the elite few. And that's what I think we need to get back to. And that's what I think this could potentially give us the chance to get back to. So sorry, I talked a lot on that. Any thoughts on this kind of NIL valuation and these dollars from you overall for the top tier, the mid tier, us? Anything on any of this from you?
Just my 2 cents. I think the evaluation or the valuations are irrelevant. Um, just in the sense of how much money is actually flowing, why, from whom, how. It's just tough. And when you look at, going back to the billboard issue,
Yes.
not billboard issue, but the billboards. I look at it in the terms of fishing, right?
Yep.
So you cast a big net, you get some mullet, you get some pinfish. That's good bait, right?
Yep.
You get a little bit of fish here, fish there, whatever. But those guys are, for lack of a better term, you're just fish.
Yep.
You get a lot of them, you get schools of them. It's sustainable to a point, but you want to go big sea fishing,
Yep.
good reel, good rod, and you got to get yourself in position to catch a 160-pound marlin, whatever the deal, sailfish.
Yeah. Forgive the term with your analogy, but you need to catch some whales.
Pretty much, right? And so when I look at that from a growth standpoint, anytime you are selling a vision, a mission, a this, a product, a widget, whatever it is, you can do mass marketing, and that's going to probably bring in some masses where, from a quality standpoint, it might not be up there, but from quantity, you're going to drive volume. And like you said, will it be 6, 7, 800,000 a year? I mean, that might be able to get us a solid tight end, 4-star tight end, whatever. Fine. Probably won't get us a quarterback. No way.
No way.
Outside of that, when we have those intimate conversations with the relationships that Mr. Weeby has in his Rolodex, or some of the other conversations that are spurred on because of it, when you sit with a business owner, when you sit with an affluent family, when you sit with generational wealth, when you sit with, 3 generations of alumni, and go through and say, hey, this is why we need some resources. There's where the ask comes in. And that's where you can be more targeted to get those whales, to get those bigger dollars coming in. So I agree with you. Will it help? Who knows? Time will tell. The billboards, you might get a good bit of volume, but the quality might not be there. But that's okay. At this point, to your point, we know the volume we can get. And so, having that been said, I kind of agree with the whole idea of We don't necessarily want people to know what's in the kitty, what's in the collective, how much is swimming in there, right? It's really good sometimes to play chess, not checkers. And I kind of agree with that sentiment there. Now it's just a matter of, can we really, given this other change in the let's just call it the NIL era, this other change that Mr. Baker is going to have to pivot against based off the recent rulings. It's really going to be interesting to see where else we can get funds from here in this very short year, because the fall
Yep.
is, holy smokes,
Yeah.
6 months, 5 months away.
Yep. No, for sure. And come the time to actually close these deals, right? I did hear, by the way, that there is a plan to move early signing day up yet again outside of the transfer portal window. I want to say that's potentially happening this year. Don't know if that's final yet, but I did read something about that. So potentially that is closing in even quicker. That it's either going to move to either early December or maybe even late November, which is crazy to me because it's during the season, right? It's nuts.
Bananas.
But hey, it is what it is. And it's got to be early December, right? Like right before or as the winter transfer portal opens, which I get because you want that to not overlap, right? That's one of the things they were talking about, is that the calendar is nuts right now between those two things being simultaneously going on. So I'm glad they're doing it, but I don't know what the official date is, in fairness. But I hope they do that, because that needs to change, right? We need to have that out of the way before the transfer craziness starts, right? So
Yeah.
I hope that does happen. But to that point, it's less time to generate funds that are going to be needed in order to close some of these deals. It's crazy to talk about recruiting that way, but that's the way it is, right?
Oh yeah.
So yeah, interesting stuff. We'll see what happens as we go forward. And I do want to make one quick statement that I'm not knocking the billboards for saying that. I'm not saying that, all monies towards this are good monies,
Yeah.
as long as the juice is worth the squeeze, right? As long as you're making money and not losing money, obviously. But assuming you are making money, which I'm sure they are to a degree, I guess my point is that, depending on how much effort and time and thought was put into this, how much of that could have been spent potentially, like, what was the opportunity cost? Right, we use a little business terminology there, right? So what was the opportunity cost of doing that versus what could have been invested in potentially some higher revenue generating aspects, right?
Yeah.
So even if this does generate the mill that I talked about, or even more, which again, I don't see as really plausible, but let's say it's even more. Okay, fine, but we need 10 mil. Let's get real. We need 10 mil. So what's that look like, right? Where's that coming from? Because it's not coming from billboards. It's just not. So where's that going to come from? And what is being done to that end in the short term? Again, the long term, I think we're okay. I really do. I think we're going to be fine. But in the short term, what do we do to get that money? Because we can't continue to be in the position where the recruit comes to us and says, hey, I really want to come play for you guys, but I was offered this, right? Your story from the coach that hey, coach, I was offered this, and I really want to come be a Gator. All I'd like to see you guys do is match.
Yep.
I mean, as much as I have the ethical issues with it, and I understand that, but hey, this is the state we're in, at least currently, right? So for now, I'd like to be able to say, yeah, we can do that. Even if it needs to happen outside of the coach, right? Fine. Let's say, hey, I can't have that conversation, but let me put you in touch with my NIL people, to have that conversation with you. Fine. If that's the way it needs to be handled from an ethical perspective, I'm all good with that. but let's be able to put him in touch with the NIL people. And they say, yeah, no problem. As opposed to, no, I'm sorry, we can't do it because we don't have the money. Because that's the problem that Florida's in. Let no mistake be made about it. The current problem that Florida is in, at least with the football program. Now, in fairness, I have heard some things, quick deviation here. I have heard some things that the basketball program is not in this same state at all, for the record. And quick call out, Florida 105, Alabama 87. Let's go. Huge win. But quick call out that the basketball program is not in the same state with NIL for whatever reason. I don't really know why that is or how that works or why the fund differentiation is there, but the basketball program is in a better NIL position than the football program is. Don't know why, but I've heard that from more than one source, media source for the record, not source close to the program, media source. But at any rate, want to be able to be in a position where the NIL collective can say to said player, yeah, we can work with that, as opposed to, no, I'm sorry, this is the best we can do, and they walk. Because we know we have seen that happen. Look at early signing day. Look at the transfer portal. Look at, because if you don't think CJ Daniels getting paid close to $1 million to go to LSU didn't factor in his decision to transfer from Liberty to LSU instead of Florida, despite coming to Florida for a visit, didn't factor into his decision, you are foolish. You are foolish to think that that didn't factor into his decision if you don't think that it did. So if you think that we missed out on CJ Daniels because LSU is the better program solely, I'm not saying they aren't a great program, and especially for wide receiver, they damn sure are. But if you think that NIL didn't play a factor there, you are foolish. And I guarantee you we could not pay him what LSU did. Period. And I'll leave it at that.
That's your 2 bits.
That is my 2 bits, for sure.
That sounds good. Any other closing thought? By the way, great call out. I was just going to see that. I mean, 105 to 87. Great job, Gator basketball.
Absolutely.
Great win. So hopefully this is great
Huge
momentum
win.
going into March Madness. But outside of that, really enjoyed the opportunity to talk about NIL with you tonight, my man. Any other closing thoughts before we wrap it up?
You know, I guess I would say from like an overall perspective here, I know this can be a frustrating topic for a lot of different reasons. One, for our struggles with it. Two, for just maybe the concept for a lot of people. I would say I think it's something that we need to kind of wrap our heads around because it's not going away, right? You have legislation from Congress that states that this is a thing now. That's not going to stop. That's not just, we're not going to go back to the way things work, right? This is the way it is. I understand people may not love it. I get that. But I think it's important to try to find some acceptance. But I also think it's okay to not be thrilled with the way that it's going down right now. Because I'm not either. I'm not loving it. And not just because of Florida's struggles with it. I'm not loving a lot of the things about the way stuff's happening at the moment, right? It's not great. I won't go as far as to say that I'm in, the Dark Sith Lord's camp about it, but but I'm not crazy about it. I'm not. I think there's a lot of underhanded, under the table, backdoor stuff happening that I've never been crazy about. Now, let's not fool ourselves and think that college football hasn't had that going on for college sports in general, right? You cited Nick Nolte earlier. For those that haven't seen Blue Chips from 1994, probably a good time to watch that movie. The difference is that now it's legal when then it wasn't. But it's read a really cool article about that, actually. Quick side note. They said they could never remake that movie now because now all that stuff's allowed. And it was a really, really cool point to think about for perspective. But if you haven't seen Blue Chips, I recommend watching it just for perspective. Really cool movie. Plus you get to see Shaq and Penny Hardaway in their prime. Really, really neat movie. But regardless, I don't blame you for not loving it if you don't love it right now. But what I think we're working towards, I guess I would say what I hope we're working towards, and I do think there are signs that indicate that we are working towards, in especially some of the recent stuff that's just happened in the last couple of weeks, is that we are potentially at least opening the door towards something that is better than where we are today. And I have hope for that, and it's more than just, you know, a fleeting glimpse of a prayer. I think there's real progress towards that end, that we could potentially get to something that's a lot more well defined, a lot more well organized, and a lot more well structured than what we're looking at right now. And I think if we can get there, this will look a lot better. This will feel a lot healthier than it does right now. It's going to take a little more time, but have a little patience with that. And I think we'll be very much more pleased, especially because of where we're positioned and the conference that we are in. The conference that we are in is important right now. It really matters. I know we love to talk about the SEC and brag on the talent and everything else, but currently the thing that matters more than anything is the money. And we've got some of that where we are. And that's going to be important here in the short run and the long run, I think, when it comes to this stuff. So those would be my closing thoughts, is just that I don't think it's all bad, especially not as we look out over the coming months and hopefully not too many years. When it comes to this stuff, especially as the tides seem to be starting to turn a little. It's just a question of how long that takes. So
Yeah.
that would be where I'd end this up. What do you got to finish this out?
As a contractor told me one time, Randy, whatever your budget is, and your time frame is, it's probably going to take twice as long and cost twice as much.
Nice. Yes.
Um, so I'll just leave it at that. And with that, we'll go ahead and sign us off. Well, wherever you are, wherever you may be listening, thank you for taking the time, and we will definitely see you around Gator Nation. Till next time.